Crash, the David Cronenberg film based on the JG Ballard book. The film that many people think brought down a British government or finished off a British government and scared, confused, and angered the billionaire Ted Turner. How did those things happen? I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about how maybe it's the least sexy film you will watch and maybe some of the history behind it and break that down. So initially the book, Crash by JG Ballard, he described it as a cautionary tale. About 80% of it is the same as the film. If we're looking at it in its most literal terms, it's a group of people who seek pleasure, sexual gratification from reenacting car crashes, famous car crashes. It was made into a film, probably another unfilmable book made into a film by David Cronenberg. And the important thing to remember about this is this was written around the time that JG Ballard lost his wife at a very young age. This is about violence and suddenness, and what it does as well is that it breaks down what pornography is and what it has to be to certain people in order for them to feel, in order for them to get the gratification out of it, repeating shock to feel something. That makes it a really transgressive film, a really transgressive book. It kind of questions people's relationship with pornography and what normality is. And it's interesting, the link between the car and sexuality as well. The sort of famous, 1950s going parking the car and watching a movie and what would go on in that car is kind of what David Cronenberg talks about when people criticize the film, is that cars and sex have always been interlinked, and most of the people who are complaining may have been conceived in one. It's this kind of idea of a tremor of excitement, a rush of excitement, trying to find that and chase that, kind of like a drug addict needing more drugs in order to feel what they felt the first time they had that drug. Sort of awakening and liberating. And I guess transgression is really important to think about here as well, like going above and beyond what logic or what society would say is acceptable, even in pornography. So it's this vision of a car crash being something that is exciting. Now, people thought it was like an anti-humanist film, but actually what it does is it makes us look at ourselves in a really cold way, in a cold and calculating way, to kind of look at the primitive desires of humans and how that can be kind of twisted and mixed up. And, that none of these characters, and I think this is really important as well, that none of these characters, they're not morally judged. They don't have morals. They don't finally learn the error of their ways. And like I think Cronenberg says it many times, that that's actually quite disingenuous, because the things that these characters so-called care about in a lot of these mainstream films that people were trying to make this into and trying to push him into making it into this way, are actually the people making the films don't care about those things. They don't have those morals. In fact, they're probably behaving in reprehensible ways themselves, but they just think this is what a film needs to have in it. That I think Cronenberg said along the lines of somebody going into the drawer and taking out the gun and using it even though they don't want to, or the hero kind of thing. Everything in this is clinical, and it's a way of looking at people in a way that makes the audience uncomfortable. Certainly it isn't something that the people who main criticisms tend to be, this is a pornographic film, and I think that that possibly means that they haven't watched it in some cases, or they've watched a little bit of it. It replaces all the things that you would see. It takes the form of a pornographic film, but all of the pornography is taken out of it. It's deadpan. It's about removing limitations and internalized control that you might already have. So, like the idea of driving safely, living safely, doing the right thing. When you take those things away and people follow their base desires, there's this obsessive repetition that the characters have. And that's like kind of a, without going too deeply in it, it's that kind of deep-seated self-annihilation that probably JG Ballard was feeling at the time of writing the book and put into these characters. And it's really brave of Cronenberg. I mean, he didn't Hollywoodize them. It's about reaching the greatest pleasure attainable by that person. So that's my kind of little thesis, I guess, or a little overview of what I think the film is about and what I've understood the film to be about. It's not an easy watch. So how did it nearly bring down UK government and Conservative Party? Well, in 1996, in June 96, there was a headline in the Evening Standard, a movie beyond the bounds of depravity. And these were written by the London Evening Standard's film critic Alexander Walker, actually somebody who stood up for Clockwork Orange back in '71. He'd been a reviewer for over 30 years. Now, this caught people's attention, and even somebody who you'd say is quite a liberal critic, so eyebrows were raised. I guess when the first scene is a sex scene, the second scene is a sex scene, the third scene is a sex scene, none of those are sexy, but you have to watch them, you have to sit through them. You might not make it through those, or you might stop feeling a certain way about them. Now, it's intense, it's controlled, it's uncompromising. And what happened was that it has like a disturbing power, I guess, to it. And cars are always kind of part of Hollywood and movies, and so even sort of dangerous films like Badlands and Bonnie and Clyde, you know, all have cars involved in them in some way or another, and accidents, and you know, being riddled with bullets. But this one is more about taking something commonly safely in a way, because for some reason shooting Riddle in a car full of bullets is much more acceptable than sex. That it's taking that conventional Hollywood idea, eroticizing it, and I guess it's making the car crashes like it's not destructive. It gives them something, which makes it really unsettling and disturbing. It is, in a way, autobiographical. James Ballard is the character, is the writer. He wanted to give it a degree of honesty. The response in the UK was very, very different than other countries. France and certain other places that kind of accepted it. This was manipulation in the media. I think you've got to remember that this is full-on tabloid media period, as we know now, through phone tapping and hacking and all those things, that these things were going on, not unmonitored, but just they were not being stopped. There was nothing in the way of printing whatever you wanted without any real comeback on that. So political manipulation in the media was big. When this was debuted in Cannes Film Festival, it pretty much divided everybody there 50-50. It did win the Special Jury Prize for Originality, Daring, and Audacity. Can't really argue that one. Somebody like Francis Ford Coppola, he refused to give the award to Cronenberg personally. So, it got some big names, some people coming out and just not willing to kind of look beyond what they thought the film was on an initial watch, or maybe even just the first, some of the more shocking parts of the film. Now, the Daily Mail, being one of the most right-wing newspapers in the UK, and also reactionary, front page censors yes to depraved sex film. And they then put pressure on the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, and publish things about their private lives, doorstep them, brought one of them to tears on her doorstep, to get readers to sort of boycott anything coming out of Sony Studios in the UK, because that was who's distributing Crash. So this was all very exciting for the Conservative government, who were pretty much a lame duck. They were about to come up to a general election. It was unlikely that they were going to win that general election. So this is where we hold on to a different... we take a bite out of something that's in the news, and we hold on to that by our teeth, and we say, oh, this is unacceptable, and we need to do something about it, and we will. We're the only party that will do something about it. And Virginia Bosmley, who was the Heritage Secretary, she encouraged people to ban it, and it actually, Ballard said this at the time, that whipping up of the panic actually was in the face of their almost certain defeat. Like I said, so they're literally just jumping on board bandwagons. He said they're climbing aboard every conceivable bandwagon. It still made a profit. The film still made a profit, but it just added to the fact that this government was without a touch, and it kind of was an end, and it was an interesting way of kind of putting a little note next to that end of their time in office. So it was really interesting in that sense. Now, it's important to remember, because of this stirring up through the media and the government trying to hold on as tight as they could, there was nothing approaching the craziness around this film anywhere else other than in England. And Cronenberg would say that, that he's had reactions from 40 countries and nothing the craziness that he found in England. A siege, they were trying to build like a siege mentality, like, keep this away from us, don't let us think. It is about how the brain works. It's about psychopathic obsession. Now, it doesn't give us consequences. Well, obviously bad things happen. I don't want to give it too many spoilers, but bad things happen, but they're desired, they're wanted. And I think it's important that Cronenberg didn't bow to that pressure and give those things. Everything in the film is consensual. One thing it doesn't do, I guess, is kind of say that, innocent people could get killed during this. That's one thing that hasn't, while they're following their things. But part of obsession is that you don't consider the things around you. So you can work that out for yourself. You don't need something bad to happen and then regret it for you to know that. And this is what this film is. You have to work it out for yourself. Maybe that's what people don't like about it. So the important thing as well to remember, before we talk a little bit about how Ted Turner saw it, Billionaire Ted, how he saw it, was that people were like, oh, well, people are more than just their sexual desires. Like, why, why the characters are just defined by this. And Cronenberg said that actually, if the sex scenes are the movie, it's a study of desire and obsession and having control over how you feel and trying to find and chase that feeling, and transgressive. And obviously part of pornography is that it's transgressive. It's that's the frish on the excitement of it. So maybe if people are watching it for the story around that, there isn't one. If they're looking for character development, they're not going to find that, because it's a character study of desire. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things that brought down the government in this way was on television. It was on BBC, a BBC political program. Somebody had said, "Oh well, we shouldn't be seeing disabled people having sex." Well, the character Gabrielle, we shouldn't have to see that. I mean, people having to see disabled people. And actually, the BBFC screened it to 11 disabled people and found that they didn't enjoy it, but they were happy that disabled people could be seen as sexually attractive and sexually active. And it meant that there was another group of people who believed and understood that the Conservative government were out of touch, because essentially the idea there, the thought there is that we don't want to see that, or we don't want to know that that happens. We'd rather we didn't know that happens. We'd rather pretend it doesn't happen. Pretend that disability isn't there. And if you're part of a minority group, you're disabled, you don't want people to pretend that you're not there. So again, didn't really help. Now, the Ted Turner side of it is really interesting. So the company putting out the film in the USA, when it was going to be screened in cinemas, it was not owned by Ted Turner. But when it finally came round to being released, Ted Turner, being a big media magnate that he was, owned that company at the time. Came out straight away. He came out with a when do we draw the line point of view. He was confronted about this by quite a few people, including Cronenberg. And there's a story about him kind of talking to Cronenberg directly and just sort of almost like crushing his hand in one of the, like a kind of power play handshake, kind of making it clear that, and some of the things that he was saying about it were really interesting, you know, and Cronenberg's comeback was, you're saying, and this is pretty much what he's saying, is like, we're encouraging our young people to have sex in cars. And Cronenberg's comeback, again, if I go back to what I said earlier on, was a lot of the people in the 1950s, that's who were born around that time, that's how they were conceived, that's how that happened. So Ted Turner, Fine Line was his studio, which was distributing the film in the United States. He said straight away he hated it. He said it will repel and disgust viewers. I don't think anyone's saying that you have to like it, but I think it's a bit like we were just saying before about the disabled people. Is like people have transgressive sexual desires, and that's not in many films, and it's not discussed, and it's uncomfortable. But because something's uncomfortable, should we not make a film out of it? Is it more disingenuous to make a film with the same character redemption arc made by people who are in fact morally reprehensible in real life? So I think that's quite interesting, but obviously that's not how Ted Turner saw it. He basically got it to the point where it was leaked out into a few cinemas. It didn't have that impact in the cinemas in the USA as it would. Everything was slowed down, and he didn't really see it the way that he did. It's one of the few times that somebody owning the company that is going to make money out of it feels that they have to come out and talk about it, almost in like and I think it was Dan Quayle came out and talked in the USA about Murphy Brown being an unmarried mother and people like that, and or George Bush saying we need to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. These are things that are like very similar to what we were discussing when we talked about the UK's response, but this is just on the power brokers, the people in charge. But for one film, relatively small budget, the subject matter so scary that it's shook a billionaire and created moral panic. Or moral panic in a way probably not utilized around films since the video nasties of the 1980s in the UK. I'm going to post lots of links to some of the discussions that I read, some of the articles that I read, and yeah, I'm going to watch it again and see what I think on a second viewing, and try and look at it in an analytical way. Let me know if you just don't want to engage with it, and that's fine if you don't, but why? And I guess the thing with Ted Turner and the thing with the British government, it's not just about not wanting to engage with it, it's not wanting other people to engage with it as well. It's one thing to make a decision for yourself, but to make a decision for lots of other people because you feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure about that one. Watches The Watchmen. Roger Ebert describes this film as the characters being in a trance-like state when they are drawn to something they should not do. They've passed through the senses of common sense and inhibition and arrived at critical velocity. and they're just going to do it. They need to do it. This compulsion is associated with sex, but it's associated with shoplifters, gamblers, drug users, even stuntmen. All of those characters are in that trance-like state, drawn to it. And look how extreme things have to get for some people to like them, to feel something. That's the scary part. That's what makes this a horror film. This is about becoming enslaved to the things that turn us on, that excite us. It is anything but pornographic. It's a horror film.
Trust your mother.
Why would anybody watch a scum show like Videodrome?
And Max Wren can do nothing to stop it.
Think you have a strong stomach. A motion picture that takes you beyond fear.
In a society driven to extremes,
you coming?
My honest reaction is that the subject of Crash left me feeling empty, not even challenged in the am I hip enough to get it way. Crash has some beautiful bodies on view, but also some ugly ideas, and as I said, I think it really did leave me cold.
Well, of course, it was intended to leave you cold. I think I liked the movie a lot more than you did. I would like to make it clear that most people are probably going to hate it, be repelled by it, or walk out of it, just as they did at the Cannes Film Festival.
Why is that?
Because it's too tough for them to take.
Oh, you mean
really
Roger?
Is. Yes, it is. It is.
Wait a second.
Sex involving wounds and blood and scabs. And
Sex involving wounds and blood and scabs.
A lot of people don't want to see it, don't want to have anything to do with it, don't want to get close to it.
I want to be clear. Do you think that that's my objection, the nature of my objection?
I felt that your objection was that you didn't really bring any sympathy to what he was trying to do, and I'll tell you what he was trying to do. He's trying to make a pornographic movie without pornography. He's taking the form of a pornographic movie without the function or the content. He's substituting car crashes for the usual erotic stuff in order to show the mechanism of human compulsion and obsession.
Okay, but wait a second.
And it's a fascinating study of the way the mind works in connection with images that we connect with sex.
Roger, it can't. I'm going to review the movie and then I'll review your review. My objection to what you said is that I think that there are, quote, soft porno stuff in the picture. When you see sex on the hood of a car, when you see people making it in bed.
None of the sex scenes in this movie are directed in a way to be erotic.
Oh, I think that the one scene in bed between Deborah Carr-Unger and Spader, I think that that's intended to be erotic. I think a woman touching her breast, pulling it out of her bra, that's intended to be erotic. And I think it can be erotic. I'm saying that the ideas in the film, said by the performance artist, that somehow this is a connection between life and death, that's a bunch of hooey.
The movie doesn't.
It's hooey.
The movie thinks so too, Gene. The movie is about crazy people.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. The movie doesn't argue these people are right, or even that they make sense. I've never seen anyone like this before.
God help us both.